All right, ladies and gentlemen, I have another snub nose revolver to bring you, and this is another one that came from my favorite shop here in town that I hate and I love at the same time, because every single time I go in there, they always have something that I want, and in this case, my most recent trip to them was no exception. So, what we have today is a Colt Detective Special, third generation, third iteration, whatever you want to call it, third model, the third change, I guess, if you want to use maybe some more Smith & Wesson type terms. But yeah, this is a Colt Detective Special that was made in 1975. I looked up the serial number for this gun, and thankfully Colt's Archives had it on their website there. So I looked it up, and sure enough, 1975, which is very, very close to my Smith & Wesson Model 36 here, which I reviewed in the other video. So that's really awesome that these two guns have pretty similar, I guess, production dates. So the Colt Detective Special, this gun has been in production, well, was in production, I should say, for a very, very long time. I think they went back to like the 1920s, 1930s is when they first started making these things. And they made changes over the years. And if you really want to get into like the specifics of like each change as it went along, each generational like model, I guess, you can look that up yourself. I'm not necessarily too savvy on that yet, but I just know for a fact this one, in fact, here is a third generation, mostly because of the shrouded ejector rod here, as you can see. So, yeah, Colt Detective Special is one of the, I guess, one of the earliest like kind of snub nose revolver designs out there, and I would say this is definitely in competition to the Model 36 Smith & Wesson, right? I mean, they're very, very similar in size, similar in purpose, similar shape, all of that. But as I've mentioned before, I'm definitely more of a Colt guy, always have been. So I was very, very, I guess, happy to see this in the shop for what they were selling it for. Because most Colt Detective Specials I've seen have usually been just absolutely worn to heck, like carried a lot, shot a lot, just beat up examples that are just, they just don't look very good, and they've been rode hard and put away wet. But the prices are still, like, I would say pretty high. I mean, we're talking like $750, $800, $850, $900 for a beat up example of a Colt Detective Special. Because Colts seem to have like this collector's market, I guess. A lot of older gentlemen out there really do like these Colts, and they command a premium, and sometimes I think fairly undeservedly. I mean, yeah, they're nice revolvers and everything, but you're not going to sit there and try to sell me a beat up Colt Detective Special like this one for, you know, $800 when all the finish is worn off and the timing is all wrong, and the springs and everything are all bad and it's all beat up, and you know, just not interested in that. So when I came across this one, as you can see, it is pretty dang clean. It's not the original grips that came with it, but I put these on later. You know, when they were selling it there for about $600, I was like, dude, I gotta buy that now, because I don't think I'm gonna see another Colt Detective Special in this condition for that price, probably for a long time, if ever again. So, you know, my love of Colts and everything, I was like, that's a good deal, can't pass it up, so of course I bought it. So, this particular example, I probably wasn't really carried a whole lot. There was minor, like, little pits and stuff on the cylinder. There's a bit of a scratch here on the rear trench, as you can see. It won't focus, but it's right there where I'm pointing with my finger. There's a little scratch right there in the rear trench sight. So it's not exactly 100% pristine. There's some minor wear and marks on the hammer and things. Very, very minor things that if you're not like looking directly close at it, you're not really going to notice. But yeah, a nice piece, to be honest. And I'll just show the original grips that came with it. So they're like these brown wooden grips like this, pretty small, very standard for this kind of thing. But yeah, this is what originally came with the gun, as is it's supposed to be. But in shooting it, my shooting experience with this, it was a little difficult to control, to be honest, because there's not really a whole lot of texture, not a whole lot of grip. And what I found is, because the way Colt revolvers are versus a Smith, the ergonomics are actually quite a bit different, in the sense of like where my hand rests on the frame itself and how easy it is to pull it back in single action, and also my double action pull and things like that. The ergonomics are ever so slightly different, but as a revolver shooter, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Smiths and Colts just have a different position as far as like the depth of the grip, the how far the trigger reach is, the knuckle of the frame itself, and where it sits in your hand, and how the gun recoils. Right, Colts tend to, at least for me, anyways, when I shoot them, they tend to roll back in my hand quite a bit. So my hand is kind of like this to the point where I can get my thumb on the hammer a lot easier under recoil. So when it goes to recoil, it's up like this, and I'm back on target again in single action. Versus a Smith tends to sit a little higher up, so when it does recoil, it doesn't really rock in my hand so much. It doesn't scoot back like this. It just tends to stay in place because the knuckle design and everything is just different. So, but shooting this, yes, it was a little hard to control with the standard wooden grips. So I ordered, of course, some Packmeyers because Packmeyers are my favorite. And I ended up trying the compact grip like this that has a little nub here at the bottom for your pinky, because I noticed these wooden grips were just a little too small for my hand, and my pinky wasn't quite finding any purchase. It was sitting directly underneath the flat of the grip here, and that was very uncomfortable. I did not like that. So when I put the Packmeyer grips, these ones here, my pinky has a place to rest, right there, as we can see. Perfect, awesome. And these were actually very, very comfortable, very shootable. It absorbed the recoil quite well. I mean, I could shoot this snub nose pretty much all day, and it worked very well. And I think it kept more into proportion of a snub nose revolver, right? So snub noses are meant to be carried, of course. So the smaller profile that you have, the better they carry, the more comfortable they are to carry. They're not poking you, they're not sticking out of your clothing, they're not being obnoxious. So a nice compact grip like this is very nice. But I also wanted to try some, as they call, presentation style grips, right? And so if you look at my Colt Trooper here, this has presentation style grips on it. And it kind of reminds me of like the square butt Smith & Wesson type grips, where they kind of flare out here at the bottom and to have a nice flat surface here, but they're very large and they can definitely accommodate a full grip, as you see here. I absolutely love these styles of grip. So I wondered if there was a equivalent for the Colt so-called D-frame size, for this Detective Special size gun. And I was kind of disappointed to find out that Packmeyer doesn't make those anymore. But I found on Gunbroker there was a guy who was selling some vintage grips, like original, new old style grips. And there's some on eBay as well, but all the pictures look kind of grainy, and like the grips have been through someone's, they've been carried and used a lot. So I wanted something that was a little bit cleaner. So guy on Gunbroker actually had some pristine vintage Packmeyer presentation grips for a Colt D-frame. And I was very happy to receive these. So I paid about 35 bucks total for them, but this is the same style and shape as my Trooper, which I love shooting. And so this is absolutely my most favorite grip for this gun. Now, I will say though, proportionality-wise, it seems a little big for a Colt snubby, and it's probably not the most concealable thing, to be honest, because it really is kind of big. It feels kind of like a target grip, right? And of course, snub-nose revolvers are not necessarily target guns. You can target shoot with them, yes, as I've proven in my Model 36 video, getting a 2-inch group at 25 yards, It's pretty awesome. But yeah, this is a little big, but I think honestly, like even if I was going to carry it with these presentation grips, I think actually it would still carry quite well, because when I'm carrying it, it's usually appendix style, at least for me. And so the curved nature of the grip here like this tends to sit a little bit better for my body and how I carry and how I move and walk and sit down and things. The curved style of this tends to just suit me a lot better, rather than something that's like maybe a little bit like a semi-auto pistol like my Walther PPS. It tends to stick out a lot. It has a lot like thicker grip, I guess, and it kind of pokes me in my gut. Versus a curved grip like this tends to just just sit a little better with my physiology, right? My body shape. So, yeah. That being said, if I probably would switch back to these compact grips if I was really going to carry this a lot. I'm probably not though, because I already have like my Taurus 856, 586, 856. Sorry, I get those mixed up. The Taurus revolver, the snub nose, right? That is perfectly acceptable for everything that I might need to do for a snub nose revolver in a modern iteration. There's very little need for me to carry a vintage piece like this. That being said, if I needed to, I could press this into service tomorrow and it would be no problem whatsoever. So it's a nice little bit of confidence to know that. But yeah, this is definitely a awesome example of like old school Colt, manufacturing quality and things like that. I mean, it just looks beautiful. Awesome. But so for shooting experience, I will say, like I said, these original wooden grips were a little bit too small for me. It wasn't the most pleasant thing to shoot, to be honest. And a lot of snub nose revolvers really aren't that pleasant to shoot unless you set them up the right way. So of course, it's always a trade-off, right? You can think of the more concealable a gun is, usually the less pleasant and less capable it is to be shootable, right? The shootability of it goes down as your concealment factor goes up. And of course, it goes the opposite way as well. If you want to increase the shootability, the concealability also goes down. So it's all about a trade-off in what you're comfortable with and what you're willing to accept. So for instance, this Model 36 here, there might be some people who would say, this wooden grip here is way too large. This is far too big for carry. This is so uncomfortable, absolutely obnoxious, unreasonable. You don't need that. But I have tried a Hogue, boot style grip where it cuts off real short on the grip here. I hated it. I did not like shooting that at all. It was painful. I wasn't very accurate. I wasn't very fast. It's just not my cup of tea, right? So it all depends. It all changes based on your personal preference. But of course, everything is a trade-off in the gun world. So, but my personal shooting experience with this, very, very fun. And of course, those who know, a Colt Detective Special has 6 shots versus a Smith & Wesson J-frame, which only has 5. So I imagine that was definitely a huge selling point way back in like 50s, 60s, 70s, right? When these two guns were head to head on like what's the best snubby for someone to carry, and you still see that debate today with things like the SIG P365 versus the Springfield Hellcat versus the Ruger Max 9. All of those itty bitty tiny little like 9mm guns that have a billion rounds in them and just get progressively smaller and smaller, right? The debate continues to go on, and it was definitely the same back in the day with these. So I absolutely am sure that that was part of Colt's marketing. They said, hey, our gun is just a teeny bit bigger than the Smith & Wesson J-frames, but it holds 6 rounds. And I'm sure they probably had something that was like, oh, here's a detailed account from this customer who tried to stop somebody with only 5 rounds in his Smith & Wesson J-frame, and he couldn't stop the threat. So he upgraded to a Colt with 6 shots, right? I'm sure that was part of their marketing back in the day. But yes, this has 6 shots of 38 Special, so it feels definitely like a regular revolver to me, because to me, revolvers in general usually have 6 shots. I've always been used to that. So my muscle memory is definitely I'm going for those double action pulls. 6 shots to me, I have it ingrained in my muscle memory, in my brain. Everything else, 6 shots is where it needs to be. So I'm very happy that this does have 6 shots. Now, I will say that the zero, I guess, for this gun is not exactly where I wanted it to be, even at the distance of 10 yards, which I was shooting it at. So I will try to point out a little problem that I've had with this one. And I don't know if this will show up on camera exactly, but if we look at the top here, if you look at the trench, and then you look at the front sight rib sight base, right? It is actually not lined up perfectly with the rear trench. So whenever they installed this barrel, it was torqued just a little bit too much in one direction, a little bit too much to the right. And so when I visibly just look at this right here, you can actually see that the front rib is ever so slightly off center. And that's a little bit of a problem because these are fixed sight revolvers. So what you have is what you get. And there's some people out there who will take a file and they'll file down the rear or the front sight, sorry, in either direction to make it hit more on point, more to point of aim. I'm not going to do that because one, I don't trust myself to do that, and also because I don't want to ruin the original finish on this. So I'm just going to learn where I need to hold this gun at certain distances to hit point of aim, point of impact, where I needed my shots to go. So it's a little bit of a learning curve, but that's part of the nature of fixed sight guns like this. You just need to know where they're hitting with certain ammunitions, and of course, this applies actually for pretty much anything that you shoot. You need to know if you're going to use this in a defensive situation, you need to know exactly where your ammunition type is hitting for that gun at that distance. You need to do that for pretty much everything. So, and this just further drives the point home because it's fixed sights. You can't just adjust it however which way you want. So, unfortunately, yes, so this one was not exactly zeroed correctly from the factory, or maybe during all the years that someone has owned this, they have torqued the barrel or they've done something to it to make it not on point. But that is a little unfortunate that I do have to deal with that. So even at 10 yards, it was hitting about, I would say, 2 to 3 inches high and about 2 to 3 inches to the left. So if you amplify that at 20 yards, well, now you're hitting 6 inches high and 6 inches to the left. So that's a big, big difference. Let's say if you're trying to engage someone at distance with a snub nose, and you never know, you might have to do that. So I never ever say, you can only practice at 3 to 7 yards and you'll be totally fine for all defensive situations ever. I never ever say that because you just don't know. So of course, as I've mentioned before, like with the Dickin drill, you need to, or should anyways, practice at further distances, your 10 yards, your 15, your 20, 25 yards, to see where your gun is hitting and how it performs at those distances so you can be confident that you'll be able to get your shots within, let's say, a human-sized target at the distances that you need to engage the threat at. So I will say that is probably going to be a challenge with this one because I only have about maybe 200 to 250 rounds through this gun right now. So for me to remember where this is hitting with the correct ammunition, defensive ammunition at certain distances, I have to do a little bit more work to understand what my correct sight picture is and where to hold this on target in order to hit the intended target. So, such is the nature of fixed sight guns. That being said though, the grouping and consistency with this gun is phenomenal. Just as good as the Smith & Wesson J-frame, right? Model 36, just as accurate. This thing is way more accurate than it has any manner of being, honestly. So, as I've mentioned before in the other video, never say snub nose revolvers are not accurate. They absolutely are. The inherent mechanical accuracy is present in this gun, 100%. I have no doubt in that. So once I figured out what the appropriate hold was for the right ammo that I had, 10 yards, I was tearing out the center of my target pretty much every time. So, barring, of course, my ability to get familiar with the gun, with its single action trigger press, and also, of course, the double action. Always should practice double action as well, as fast as you can, of course, because that's probably how you're going to shoot these things in a defensive situation, right? So, the inherent mechanical accuracy is present on this gun. It's perfect, just like the Model 36. Awesome. It's just I have to discover and practice and find out what the proper hold is for this specific gun to get it to hit where I need it to hit. So a little bit of a challenge there. A little unfortunate too, because I would really just rather wish that my guns were just point of aim, point of impact every single time. But of course, that's not how things always are. So that being said, the mechanism of this is, I would say, a little bit weaker than the Model 36, and there's a reason for that, is because these Colt designs still use the more traditional style leaf spring, where there's like a big V-shaped spring inside the frame here in the grip, and so that provides the hammer strike strength, I should say, and also the trigger return strength as well. I will say, so the trigger return kind of springiness is not as strong as the Model 36 here, and there's a reason for that. So this one, the Smiths in general, the J-frames have a coil spring. They don't have a leaf spring. So when they go and when the spring is acting on the trigger to return it, it is snappy. It's poppy. Like you can feel it. Not so much with this one. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily so much of the inherent design of the Detective Specials, if they're all supposed to be a little bit weaker in comparison to the J-frames, or if the spring itself, the leaf spring in this, is just so old and worn and used that it's just kind of weak on the return. So I'll have to look a little bit more into that, ask some friends of mine who probably know better about the subject than I do. So that's part of I guess a bit of a problem whenever you're buying old used guns like this, is that you never quite know the conditions of the springs and internals, of course, for the gun. But I would like a little bit of a stronger trigger return kind of feel for the Detective Special here. But mechanically speaking, all the shots that I have ever done with this have been 100% flawless. I've had no malfunctions, no issues, no duds, no misfires, nothing at all. This thing has performed 100% perfectly fine. And of course, it's very, very satisfying when I pop the rounds out, because for some reason this one just has a little bit more of a positive ejection when I hit the cylinder out, and all the rounds just the spent casings fall out of the gun. They definitely fall out more cleanly than the Model 36 does. This one I kind of have to struggle a little bit with, because the real estate, of course, here in this section is just not as large on the Smith as it is on the Colt. So when I'm dumping the rounds out, they tend to get caught a little bit here on the grip. With the Colt, I've never had that issue with whatever grips I've used. So I know some of the bulkier grips can get in the way of the ejection, but I've never had that problem with the Colt. So as far as trigger feel, the double action to me feels more pleasant than the Smith, and it's not quite as stageable as the Smith, but the whole experience of pulling it through and letting it go, I would say, is a little bit more pleasurable and more accurate for me when I'm shooting it in double action only. The single action, I would say, is it's hard to beat, to be honest. Just tiny pressure and clean, very clean. The Smith is also very clean too, but still, the mechanisms I have learned from my Trooper definitely apply to the Detective Special as well. So to me, this trigger feels definitely just more at home for me and what I've learned in my muscle memory than the Smith does. So like I said, I've always been a Colt guy. I've been raised on this revolver. This Colt Trooper was my first revolver ever. So to me, this feels right at home. So definitely a good trigger press. Overall too, I would say, just in terms of fit, finish, bluing quality, the confidence that I have in the guns, I actually really do prefer the Detective Special over the Model 36. I just do. Now, I do realize that this gun is a little bulkier. It has a much thicker barrel. If you look at that, that is like a whole, thick barrel, versus the Model 36, which is a tapered design, as you can see here. Look at the difference in barrel size, right? Barrel thickness. That is huge to me. That is gigantic. So to me, it feels like a bull barrel type gun. It just feels more solid. I feel more confident. Now, is it going to add a little bit more weight? Yes, it will. Will that 6th round add more weight? Yes, it will. Is the Detective Special a little bit bigger than the J-frame? Yes, it is. But it's not so much bigger that it's inconvenient and that I notice it in any meaningful way. So to me, this is definitely a very carryable piece, and me being a Colt guy, of course, I definitely prefer this over the Smith. So, but I guess if you really did want to go for ultimate concealability, smallest gun possible, lightest gun possible, then yes, of course, the J-frame would probably be your more ideal choice than this. But I just can't get over the niceness of this particular Detective Special. The bluing is awesome. I mean, it has the little Colt pony right there. Oh, I love that so much. And of course, collectors go crazy for that kind of thing. So, you know, this was back when Colts were actually good, before they dropped off in the 90s and just, oh, really dropped off. Tragic tale of Colt. And, you know, those who kind of know a little bit better now, even the modern iterations of Colts are not necessarily what I would call up to the old quality, you know, with these type guns and, you know, my Python, which I don't have with me right now, but, you know, the old original Pythons versus the new ones. And that's a whole discussion in and of itself. But this is definitely old school Colt quality, you know, old school Packmeyer grips. You know, when I got these grips in, the package that the guy had sent me was, I mean, the shell like this, the plastic shell for the grips was yellow with age. It was literally crumbling when I took it out of the packaging. That's how old it was, you know? And of course, these grips just look as if they were made yesterday. So definitely some new old stock, if you will. Oh, absolutely love it. The only way these grips would be better is if they had the Colt medallion in the, well, the medallion socket here rather than Packmeyer's logo. Just like my Trooper, you know, my Trooper's got the Colt pony and logo right there. I really wish I could get some for this, you know, with the Colt logo, but hey, you know, I'll settle for what I can get. Besides, it just looks nice. So that's the Colt Detective Special, third generation, third model. I know there's some older models out there that don't have the shrouded ejector rod here, but overall, I mean, this thing, it's just a nice gun. It really is. And I can really see why a lot of those, you know, boomers and older guys, why they command such a price for these things, even in beat up condition, because they really are nice guns. But I'm glad I snagged this for what I did. I'm super glad it was available, and you know, this is, I would say, definitely a staple of noir, you know, detective type, hard-boiled detective type stories and fiction and things like that. You know, it's called a detective special for a reason, right? So, but yeah, I'm super glad that I have both of these snub-nose revolvers here, and I'll probably do a separate video comparing and contrasting the Model 36 J-frames with the Detective Special, because like I said earlier in the video, I'm pretty sure these were neck and neck in their day. So, yeah. So yeah, I'm really happy to bring this this one to you guys, and yeah, it's just a nice piece. You know, I figured I want to share it, and who doesn't love a good snub-nose revolver, right? So yeah, that's all I got to say about that, and yeah, we'll catch you in the next video.